Tonight, you'll hear about the most remarkable financial and image resurrection in pop culture history and get a rare look at what Michael Jackson left behind.
Picture this, a massive garage door that hasn't moved in 15 years, sealed shut while the rest of the world kept spinning. Inside, something waits, perfectly still, perfectly preserved, completely hidden from every journalist, every documentary crew, every curious fan who ever wondered what the king of pop kept closest to him when the cameras finally stopped rolling. In June of 2024, those doors opened for the first time since Michael Jackson's death in 2009. And what was found inside didn't just surprise the people who were there. It fundamentally changed how many of them understood the man himself. This is not a story about tabloid rumors or sensational headlines. It is a story about what a private man chose to keep private, and what those choices reveal about his inner world, his relationships, his sense of joy, and his lifelong hunger for a childhood that was taken from him long before he was old enough to understand what he was losing. Michael Jackson died on June 25, 2009, at the age of 50, under circumstances that sent shockwaves through every corner of the planet. His death was sudden, complicated, and immediately consumed by legal chaos. The estate he left behind was extraordinary in both its cultural value and its financial burden. According to reporting by financial analysts and estate attorneys who followed the case closely in subsequent years, Jackson's estate carried debts estimated at close to $500 million at the time of his passing. The executors, entertainment attorney John Branca and music executive John McClain, both of whom had been named in Jackson's will just 2 days before his death, inherited not just a name and a catalog, but a labyrinth of lawsuits, licensing disputes, and questions about assets that hadn't even been fully cataloged yet. Among those uncatalogued assets was the garage at Neverland Ranch, the sprawling 2,700-acre property in Los Olivos, California, that Jackson had purchased in 1988 and turned into what can only be described as a private universe. There was a zoo, an amusement park, a movie theater, a train station, and dozens of structures that served no purpose beyond bringing delight. Jackson had been forced out of Neverland in 2005 following his arrest and trial on charges of which he was ultimately acquitted, and he never returned to live there again. The property was eventually taken over by investors and partially rebranded, but certain areas, including the private garage, remained under the jurisdiction of the estate, locked, monitored, and untouched. For years, the question of what to do with the garage was tangled in broader legal questions about the estate's direction. Every single item on that property carried potential value, and because of that, every single item had to be accounted for carefully and deliberately. Rushing the process risked making mistakes that could affect both the estate's financial footing and its long-term cultural standing. The decision was made, quietly and with great intentionality, to seal the garage under climate-controlled conditions, allow only minimal maintenance access, and wait until the right moment to open it properly. That moment came in 2024. The gathering was small, deliberate, and deeply private. John Branca and John McClain were present. So were automotive historians, preservation specialists, and documentary crew members operating under strict confidentiality agreements. And then there was Prince Michael, Jackson's eldest son, who had been born in 1997 and was now a young adult capable of looking at his father's possessions not just with nostalgia, but with the eyes of a man trying to understand someone he had loved and lost. By multiple accounts, his presence changed the atmosphere of the room in a way that no expert or estate manager could. He moved through the space quietly, sometimes stopping, sometimes touching nothing at all, just looking. The garage doors opened slowly. The air that rushed out was described by one estate manager as carrying a faint, almost metallic stillness, the kind of air that hasn't been properly disturbed in years. As the interior lighting gradually spread across the space, the first thing that struck those present was not chaos or clutter. It was order. The space was arranged with care. It looked less like an abandoned storage unit and more like a curated collection, because that is exactly what it was. Michael Jackson had not merely parked his cars in this garage. He had arranged them. He had chosen what belonged here, and he had treated the space with the same theatrical sensibility he brought to every other corner of his life. At the center of everything, in the position of undisputed authority, sat a 1999 Rolls-Royce Silver Seraph limousine. The exterior was painted in a soft, shimmering silver blue that caught the garage lighting and seemed almost to breathe. But the exterior, beautiful as it was, prepared no one for the interior. Those who stepped inside the vehicle described the experience in remarkably consistent terms. It was not like entering a car. It was like entering a room, A very specific kind of room, one inspired by the Palace of Versailles and executed with a level of obsessive detail that could only have come from Jackson himself. The interior featured 24-karat gold accents on nearly every surface, custom crystal fixtures, upholstery that had been designed to evoke the feel of French royal chambers, and a cabin that somehow managed to feel both opulent and intimate at the same time. The mechanical specs of the vehicle were impressive on their own terms. The Silver Seraph carried a 5.4-liter aluminum V12 engine producing 322 horsepower, making it not just a showpiece but a genuinely powerful machine that moved with the kind of whisper-quiet smoothness that is essentially the defining promise of a Rolls-Royce at any price point. Jackson had reportedly paid over $200,000 for the car when it was new. By the time of his death, it had been scheduled for a 2009 auction with estimates suggesting a value somewhere between $140,000 and $160,000, but legal complications prevented that sale from ever taking place. In the years since, collectors and automotive historians have suggested that the limousine has moved beyond the category of vehicle entirely. It is, they argue, an artifact, a cultural and historical object that cannot be meaningfully separated from the story of the man who commissioned its interior and rode in it through the private corridors of his own extraordinary life. The second car in the collection told a quieter story, but in some ways a more deeply personal one. This was a 1985 Mercedes-Benz 500 SEL, and it had been with Jackson for longer than almost any other vehicle he owned. During a significant stretch of his career, particularly the years following the release of the Thriller album in 1982 and leading into the complex, culturally electric period of the mid to late 1980s, Jackson drove this car himself between his family home in Encino, California, and his recording studio in Los Angeles. That round trip covered approximately 40 miles each day. 40 miles during which one of the most creative minds in the history of popular music was alone, unhurried, and moving through the world without an entourage or an audience. The Mercedes was equipped with a 5.0-liter V8 engine producing around 302 horsepower through a 4-speed automatic transmission. Its long wheelbase made it exceptionally comfortable over long distances, and its interior featured the kind of mid-80s European luxury that combined automatic climate control, power-adjustable seating, a custom sound system, and elegant burr walnut trim throughout the cabin. It was a serious, refined car, and it was the car Jackson chose for the moments in his life that were most genuinely his own. The fact that he eventually gave it to his aunt as a birthday gift says something deeply revealing about him. He did not sell it. He did not trade it. He gave it to a family member he loved, and she loved it back hard enough to have a custom license plate made that read TKSMKL, shorthand for "Thank you, Michael." That plate, those 3 letters, speak to something about Jackson that gets lost in the larger mythology, that he was capable of profound, ordinary human warmth. The Mercedes was eventually sold at a music memorabilia auction for $100,000, but the story behind it is worth far more than any final sale price could represent. The third major vehicle in the garage was, by almost any measure, the most unexpected. A 1954 Cadillac Fleetwood, gleaming and immaculate, carrying with it a piece of Hollywood history that had nothing to do with Michael Jackson directly and yet somehow made perfect sense in the context of who he was and what he valued. This specific Cadillac had been used as a primary vehicle in the 1989 film Driving Miss Daisy, the Oscar-winning drama starring Jessica Tandy and Morgan Freeman, in which Freeman played Hoke Colburn, the chauffeur whose relationship with Tandy's character forms the emotional core of the story. Jackson owned a car that had been driven on screen by Morgan Freeman in one of the most acclaimed American films of its era. The 1954 Fleetwood carried a 331 cubic-inch V8 engine producing 230 horsepower, impressive for its time, but not the source of its value in Jackson's collection. Its value came from exactly what the other car's value came from: the story it carried. Jackson had a genuine, deep appreciation for film history, for storytelling, for the intersection of American culture and artistic legacy. The Fleetwood represented all of that in a single polished object. Auction estimates for the car have ranged from a low of around $9,000 on the conservative end to as high as $275,000 for a vehicle in pristine condition with verified provenance, according to valuation analysts at Hagerty. The wide range itself says something important about how value actually works when history, art, and celebrity converge in a single object. But beyond the cars, the garage held something else, something smaller and in many ways more emotionally striking than any of the luxury vehicles. A custom golf cart, designed in the image of Peter Pan, complete with fairy wings, Neverland Valley decals, and decorative details that could only have been conceived by someone who genuinely, earnestly wanted to live in a storybook. Jackson used this cart to move around the grounds of Neverland Ranch, traveling from one amusement ride to the next across the land he had built to be the childhood he never had. He had grown up under the tutelage of his father Joseph Jackson, a man whose approach to raising his children was famously severe and demanding. By the time Michael was performing professionally with the Jackson 5 in the late 1960s, he was already a working child artist with none of the ordinary freedoms that childhood is supposed to contain. The golf cart was not an eccentricity. It was a response. A declaration. It said, in the clearest possible terms, that Michael Jackson was going to build the world he had been denied, and he was going to move through that world in a vehicle that looked like something from a fairy tale, because he had earned the right to do exactly that. Seeing it in the garage, still painted, still decorated, still intact after all those years, is not a moment that invites mockery. It is a moment that invites something closer to grief, the recognition that behind one of the most extraordinary careers in the history of popular music was a human being who wanted, more than almost anything, to simply play. The decision about what to do with the collection after the garage was opened reflects the same careful, deeply human thinking that kept the garage sealed for so long. According to those with knowledge of the estate's internal decision-making process, the executors chose not to rush toward auction or liquidation, even though the estate's financial pressures might have made such a move understandable. Instead, the majority of the vehicles were preserved, documented, and held in trust. Karen Langford, a longtime friend of Jackson's and the official archivist of his estate, reportedly advocated strongly for maintaining the collection intact until Jackson's 3 children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, now known as BG, were fully of age and positioned to make their own decisions about their father's belongings. The vehicles, in this framework, were not assets. They were inheritance. They were the physical residue of a private life that belonged, ultimately, to the people who had loved him most closely. What the opening of Michael Jackson's garage ultimately revealed was not a collection of expensive machines. It revealed a portrait. It revealed a man who moved through the world with a hunger for beauty, for story, for connection to the things that moved him, whether that was the golden excess of Versailles or the quiet intimacy of a 40-mile drive to a recording studio where his greatest ideas were waiting for him. It revealed a man who gave his car to his aunt because he wanted to make her happy, who built an amusement park on his own land because he needed somewhere to be a child, who bought a Cadillac from a beloved film because he respected the artistry it represented. 15 years of sealed silence gave way, in 2024, to something rare, a moment of genuine historical clarity about a figure who had been obscured for decades by myth, by controversy, by the relentless machinery of celebrity culture. The garage did not answer every question about Michael Jackson. It was never going to do that. But it added something essential and irreplaceable to our understanding of him. It showed us the things he chose to keep close when no one was watching. And in those choices, unmistakable and quietly eloquent, it showed us who he was. The king of pop built himself a world inside those walls, one car, one dream at a time. And now, finally, the rest of us get to see it.